Okay, Derech Hashem now. We're going to do letter
6.
Vav, which is 6. And this is still on who is God. So it says here, another thing we have to know, this being, Hashem, it has to be mukhrach, it has to be that he is one and no more. Okay, now this is called, and they translated here, absolutely one. There's another way to understand one, which I'm going to tell us at the end. Let's just read the paragraph. Now, Perush it's impossible that there should be more than one being that must be, meaning mukhrach. You can have Ella, echad bilvad tzarich shematzev mitziut ha-mukhrach v'ashelem hazeh. You can have other beings, but it all came out from him. But there's only one mukhrach. If there's other beings around, like we just said, it's only because he willed them into existence. And they're all dependent on him. And they're not dependent on themselves. So there's only one being that is mukhrach, like we said once before, but this is now on a different point. This paragraph is talking about oneness. It's about the oneness of God. So what does this mean? Let's make a whole story now about it. Okay, so basically, there's 3 types of oneness, okay? And this, the Ramchal talks about it in other books. He calls God in a prayer, in 515 prayers, there's a book that he made, and he says, El HaGod, Echad Yachid Umiyuchad, which means one. Different ways of saying one. So Echad means one. Yachid means, we'll say single, because Yachid. And Miyuchad means special, which means like a one of a kind. So it's all words of being one. So let's just see what they mean. So when we say one, the first one, which is Echad, so there's 2 types of oneness. You can have, like the book said here, mukhrach, of being one, which means it must be one or absolutely one. The opposite of that would be if you have something that's called, if not absolute, then you would have, it's called relative. Now, what does it mean, relative oneness? So let's say you have a painting that, someone made, right? Like in the 16th century or something like that, And there's only one of them. The guy made only one. So it's a one of a kind, right? So there's only one. So what would you say? Is that absolute oneness or relative oneness?
Relative.
So it's really relative because you're guessing. But it means like this. This is how you say the sentence of relative. Relatively speaking, the guy could have made a second one. He's just not in the mood. You see? Absolute oneness is, it would be impossible for him to make another. Meaning something about the painting does not allow for another. Now that's not the way our world works. When there's one, it's usually one which is relative. But with Hashem's oneness, it's not that another God just happened not to show up on the scene. It's that another God cannot show up on the scene. You see? Because of who God is, that's what makes it impossible for another God to be there with him. It's not just he got lucky. It's like relatively. But absolute oneness is, that's what God is. He's the only one because that's who he is. Now we already translated him as existence, if you remember. Existence itself. So it makes sense now because existence can only be one. Because how can you have existence, 2 of them? Either you exist or not. This thing called existence is in everything. It's in the phone. It's in the glasses, making it come out. Existence is only one of it. If you would have another thing called existence, so who made that? The original existence would have had to brought that out into existence. So there's still only one. So once we understand that God is existence, there can only be one. You see? Refer back to the previous classes to remember that. Okay, so that's one. That's why he says mukhrach, absolute one, and not relative one. Now, just to play on this for a quick second, it says in Eliyahu Navi, Patach Eliyahu Navi. People read it all the time, but they don't catch a lot of the secrets in it. So look what it says. It says, Patach Eliyahu Navi zechor letov, Ve'amar, and he says, Ribon Almin, which means, Ribono Shel Olam, De'ant, that you are, because he's talking, he's saying, oh Hashem, that you are, he's making a conversation. De'ant tu chad, that you are one, Ve'la bechushban, and not with a chushban, like a cheshbon, with a counting, like a counting number system, let's just say, okay? So what do you mean you're one without a cheshbon? Just say you're one. So one alone would be relative one. But without a cheshbon means there's not even a cheshbon around. It's almost like saying it's one thing if you're one, but there could be a 2, 3, 4, just they happen not to be there. But your one is where there's not even a 2, 3, 4, even in potential. There's no cheshbon system for your oneness. You're just one, vela bechushban, no chushban. So that's it. By adding vela bechushban, that's Eliyahu Navi's way of saying you're absolutely chad, not relatively chad. You see? If he would have said chad alone, it would have been relative. By saying vela bechushban, that's your English word is absolute. Very interesting. You see how that is. Now also in Adon Olam, look what it says here. We say, because it's good to have the sources for these, because we say them a lot. We say, Vehu echad ve'en sheni. Very famous line. But again, why just say he's echad? Why ve'en sheni, not two? Because it means he's echad, and it's not possible sheni. Meaning velo sheni in the system. There's not even a sheni of possibility. Not that there's not two. That already saying you're only one covered that. So vehu echad is relative. Ve'en sheni is absolute. Okay, so you see how that goes. Okay, very good. Now we move on to the second one. Yachid. What's Yachid? That God is one, single. Single means Yachid. This is going to be an easy one to flow. You ready? He's internally one. Because Yachid, like within himself. Now this is what we said once is Pashut. We said it once in one of the other classes. That he's Pashut, he's simple, that he's internally all one thing and not in many parts like we are. Okay, so just refer back to that class, because that's what this Yachid means. So it's not really a Chidush here. The Ramchal is just showing that word, showing from what something else he explained, okay? So you have Echad, is he's one, meaning externally, there's no other God. Then there's Yachid, internally he's one. And then Miyuchad is he's the only one. Meaning, before we were talking about God.
Unique.
So there's, unique, which means only. We were talking about if there's a second God or not. But there's us, there's trees, there's books, there's a whole world that he made. This Miyuchad teaches us that there's not even any of that. It's only God. God being one means he's one and only. He's the only thing around. He's the only thing you'll find. When we say Shema Yisrael and Up to Hashem Echad, that's really where we're going at. We're nullifying the entire universe to say that it's all really him. There is nothing else here. And what's the famous verse for this? Very good. Right? Very good, Eddie Shabbat. We said Ein Od milivado. Now what does that mean? There is nothing, Ein Od, there's nothing else, milivado, besides him. Now maybe we should say Ein Od kamohu. There's nothing like him. Nothing like him, meaning he's stronger, whatever he made, he's in charge of. But we don't say that. We say Ein Od milivado, which means besides him there's nothing. So it means he's the only thing around. But how can that be true? We're all here. Moshe, when he was telling that to the people, they were all standing there. So how could he say there's nothing in the world except for Hashem? We're all here talking to each other. But that's the chidush, that even while we're all here, it's really only him. Meaning he's us. He's us and he's the whole universe. And what's the way to understand this example? Like we say many times, if you have your hand and you take your thumb and you make it like a little puppet. So this guy, you call him Joe. Joe is really me at the end. So I am Joe. You see? So Hashem is playing with us. We think we're our own person, but we're really just a piece of Him. So it means everything's Him at the end. He never made something that was out of Himself. It's all Him. Now, we're able to have a consciousness that we think we're a separate identity, because that's the only way we can have free will and move on and do things. But what the goal of life is to realize that He is really me. So when I say Hashem Echad, and we'll end with this, when I say Hashem Echad, what I'm supposed to be doing is like excusing myself as though I'm leaving to show Hashem is me. So how will I do that? How will I hide myself? I cover my eyes. When I cover my eyes, it's like I'm acting out a disappearing trick. I'm showing Hashem is really me and I'm not here anymore. You see, that's the real understanding of the Shema.